She had no voice, no shelter, and no hope of rescue, until a feared guide broke the ice for her. Nanook's fingers trembled as she gathered the last of the Arctic willow bark. The sky had darkened too quickly, the wind shifting from gentle whisper to threatening howl in mere minutes. At 19, she knew the dangers of the tundra intimately, yet she had ventured farther than wisdom allowed, desperate to find the medicinal plants her village needed. The first blast of the blizzard nearly knocked her off her feet. Snow particles stung her face like tiny needles as visibility dropped to nothing. Her sled dogs whined anxiously, sensing the danger before she could fully comprehend it. When the ice cracked beneath them, panic erupted. The lead dog bolted, dragging the others and the sled into the swirling white void. Nanook's mouth opened in a silent scream. No sound emerged. None had for 12 years. Not since that terrible day when the ice had claimed her brother while she watched, frozen in horror. Her throat constricted now as it had then, the memory and present danger colliding. She stumbled forward, arms outstretched, but her dogs and sled were gone. The realization settled like ice in her stomach. No transportation, no supplies, no way to call for help. The bitter cold began seeping through her parka as she struggled to orient herself in the blinding whiteness. Night was falling. Without shelter, she wouldn't survive until morning. Nanook dropped to her knees, digging frantically into the snow with mittened hands, trying to create even the most basic windbreak. Her movements became slower as the cold sapped her strength. No voice to cry out, no shelter from the merciless storm, no hope that anyone would brave this tempest to search for her. As consciousness began to fade, Nanook thought she glimpsed a shadow moving through the wall of white, but surely that was just the darkness coming to claim her. Amaruk moved like a ghost across the tundra, reading the storm's patterns as others read books. At 45, his face was weathered by decades of Arctic winds, eyes permanently narrowed from squinting against snow glare. The villagers called him Gitok, the one who is not a person, behind his back. They feared his solitude, his silence, the way he appeared and vanished like the northern lights. Today's hunt had yielded nothing. The animals sensed the coming storm before he did, retreating to their shelters. Now, as the blizzard unleashed its fury, Amaruk should have been in his own shelter 5 miles north. Instead, something pulled him southward against all logic and survival instinct. 7 winters had passed since he'd lost his family. 7 winters of exile, self-imposed after the village elders whispered that the spirits had turned against him. 7 winters of hunting alone, sleeping alone, speaking to no one but the wind. The memory of his wife's smile and his son's laughter had faded like old carvings worn smooth by time. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a scent that didn't belong, human, not animal. Amaruk paused, his instincts alert. No sensible person would be out in this storm, yet someone was. He adjusted his course, moving with the precision that had once made him the village's most respected guide. Before the accident, before the ice had broken beneath his family while he watched from shore, too far to reach them in time, the storm intensified, but Amaruk pressed forward. Perhaps this was why the spirits had drawn him south today. Perhaps this was his atonement, or perhaps it was merely another soul the ice would claim, as it had claimed so many before. The half-buried form might have been mistaken for a snowdrift, if not for the slight movement, fingers weakly clawing at the accumulating powder. Amaruk knelt beside the figure, brushing away snow to reveal a young woman's face, her lips blue with cold. He recognized her vaguely. She belonged to the coastal settlement, the silent girl who communicated through gestures. Nanook's eyes fluttered open, widening with recognition and fear. The cursed one. The man who had lost his family to the ice spirits. The outcast who lived alone in the northern reaches. Her body tensed, but she lacked the strength to move away. "Be still," Amaruk said, his voice rough from disuse. "The storm worsens." He worked quickly, wrapping her in an extra fur from his pack before hoisting her onto his shoulders. The emergency shelter he'd spotted earlier was their only hope. A small ice cave formed by wind erosion against an ancient glacier wall. Inside the crude shelter, Amaruk built a small fire using seal oil and moss from his supplies. The dancing flames illuminated their temporary haven as he positioned Nanook closer to the warmth. Her eyes never left him, wary yet grateful. When he offered water, their fingers brushed. Both flinched at the contact. Human touch had become foreign to them both. "You cannot speak," he stated, not unkindly. Nanook shook her head, then gestured to her throat and made a breaking motion with her hands. "Since childhood?" he asked. She nodded, then pointed at him questioningly. "I speak. I choose not to." His words fell between them like stones on ice. Words bring no comfort when the spirits have turned away. Outside, the storm howled its agreement, sealing them together in their fragile sanctuary of ice and silence. Dawn brought no relief. The blizzard had transformed into a white siege, entombing them in their ice shelter. Amaruk assessed their situation with the practiced eye of a survivor. The entrance was nearly blocked with snow, good for insulation, dangerous for escape. 3 days, he said, holding up fingers for Nanook. "The storm will hold us 3 days." Her eyes widened with alarm. She pointed to her village's direction, then to herself, making frantic gestures about people waiting for her. "No one searches in this," Amaruk replied flatly. "We survive first, then return." He unloaded his pack, organizing their meager resources. From a small pouch he withdrew dried fish and offered her a piece. As they ate in silence, he demonstrated how to conserve body heat, how to melt snow efficiently for drinking water, how to maintain the small oil lamp without wasting precious fuel. Nanook watched intently, her quick mind absorbing each lesson. When Amaruk needed something, she anticipated his needs, passing tools before he asked. A wordless rhythm developed between them. As night approached again, Nanook grew restless. She scratched at the icy floor, creating crude drawings. Amaruk watched as she depicted a child, herself, standing on ice, while another figure disappeared beneath. She pointed to her throat, then made a silencing gesture. "The ice took someone," Amaruk said quietly, "and took your voice with them." Tears froze on her cheeks as she nodded. Hesitantly, she pointed to him, her expression questioning. Amaruk turned away, staring at the small flame. "Sleep," he commanded. "Tomorrow we learn to read the ice. It gives warnings before it breaks. I did not listen once. I will not make that mistake again." The 3rd day of confinement brought a dangerous restlessness. Amaruk paced their small shelter like a caged wolf, while Nanook practiced making spark fire with the tools he'd shown her. The storm's howling had diminished slightly, not enough to travel, but enough to suggest an eventual end. "We will need food when we leave," Amaruk said abruptly. He pulled out a small bone knife and began carving a miniature harpoon from a piece of driftwood he carried. His hands moved with practiced precision, each cut deliberate. Nanook watched, then gestured toward the weapon and pantomimed a question about hunting. "I was the best hunter in my village," he replied, pride briefly animating his weathered features. "I led the whale hunts for 15 summers. My umiak was always first to strike, first to return with meat for all." He continued carving, the knife strokes becoming more aggressive. "I had a wife, Tatkret, it means moon, a son, Pakak, one who gets into everything. We were respected, needed." The knife slipped, cutting his thumb. He barely noticed the blood. "The elders asked me to lead hunters to new grounds when food grew scarce. I chose the path across the eastern ice. I tested it myself first. It seemed solid." His voice hardened. "I was wrong. The ice broke behind me. My family, 3 other hunters. I could only watch." Nanook touched his arm gently. He flinched but didn't pull away. "The village said the spirits turned against me. Perhaps they were right." He wiped the knife clean. "After the mourning period, I left. Better for everyone." Nanook shook her head vehemently, then pointed to the storm outside and made a braking motion with her hands. Ice breaks, storms come, she seemed to say. Not your doing. The storm finally relented on the fourth day, revealing a transformed landscape bathed in crystalline sunlight. Amaruk and Nanook emerged from their shelter, blinking against the brilliant glare. Their momentary relief evaporated as Amaruk surveyed their surroundings. "Something is wrong," he muttered, kneeling to press his ear against the ice. His expression darkened. "The currents have changed. Listen." Nanook knelt beside him, placing her ear to the ice as he showed her. At first, she heard nothing. Then, a subtle creaking, a liquid shifting beneath them. Her eyes met his, questioning. "We've drifted," Amaruk confirmed grimly. "The storm broke this ice shelf free. We're floating on the open sea." Nanook's hands flew up in alarm, gesturing frantically toward her village's direction. "Miles of open water between us and the mainland now," he said, pointing to a dark line on the horizon. "The current pulls us north, toward deeper waters." Panic flashed across Nanook's face. She mimicked swimming, then shook her head. Impossible in these frigid waters. Death would come in minutes. "We must adapt," Amaruk said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone of the guide he once was. "This ice flow is large enough to sustain us if we're careful. First, we need proper shelter." Throughout that day, he taught her to build a true igloo, cutting blocks from the compressed snow with his bone knife. Nanook learned quickly, placing each block in the spiral pattern he demonstrated. By nightfall, they had a dome-shaped shelter far superior to their previous cave. "Tomorrow, we fish," he said, as they huddled inside their new home. "The ice beneath us is our enemy and our salvation. It can break and drown us, or feed us until rescue comes." If rescue comes, his eyes seemed to add. 10 days adrift. Nanook's fever had risen with the midnight sun, her body burning while surrounded by ice. Inside their igloo, Amaruk pressed snow-dampened cloths to her forehead, his weathered face etched with concern. The seal meat they'd managed to catch had spoiled, and the strange algae she'd consumed from beneath the ice had poisoned her system. "Stay with me, child," he murmured, though she was hardly conscious enough to hear. "The spirits have not claimed you yet." In her delirium, Nanook thrashed and trembled. Her hands made frantic gestures, speaking to someone Amaruk couldn't see. Sometimes she would stare fixedly at the igloo's entrance, her expression shifting between terror and wonder. Amaruk recognized the signs. The boundary between worlds grew thin for those hovering between life and death. The Ancient Ones said, "Fever opened doorways to the spirit realm." He reached for his ceremonial pouch, untouched since his family's death, and withdrew a small carved amulet of a polar bear. Placing it around Nanook's neck, he began the healing songs his grandmother had taught him, his voice rusty but gaining strength with each verse. "Hear me, Sedna of the deep waters. This child has suffered enough silence. The ice has taken too much already." Throughout the endless Arctic day, he sang the old songs, burned sacred herbs, and told Nanook stories of Raven's creation of the world. He spoke of his son, of teaching him to track caribou across the spring tundra, of his wife's laughter when seal pups played near their summer camp. On the third day of her fever, Nanook's eyes flew open during his song. She stared not at him, but through him, her gaze focused on something beyond. "What do you see, child?" Amaruk whispered. Her hands formed shapes he'd never seen before, not village sign language, but something older, something sacred. The fever broke with the dawn. Nanook awoke to find Amaruk slumped against the igloo wall, exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. He had not slept in days, maintaining his vigil, feeding the small oil lamp, melting water for her parched lips. Something had changed in him. The hardness in his eyes had softened, replaced by a protective watchfulness she recognized from fathers in her village. When he realized she was awake, he quickly composed himself. "The spirits returned you," he said simply, offering water. Nanook drank gratefully, then gestured to ask how long she had been ill. 4 days, he replied. "The ice flow has carried us farther north. The waters here are deeper, darker." She shivered, not from cold but from memory. During her fever, she had walked with the spirits, her brother, Amaruk's family, ancestors whose faces she somehow recognized. They had shown her something important, something she now struggled to communicate. Taking a stick, she began drawing in the packed snow floor. First a circle, the full moon, then wavy lines beneath it, ocean currents. Finally, an arrow pointing southeast. Amaruk studied her drawing. "The spring tide," he murmured. "When the full moon rises tomorrow night, the currents will shift." His eyes widened with understanding. "We could drift back toward the mainland." Nanook nodded vigorously, then added to her drawing, "A boat shape." "Yes," Amaruk said, his mind working rapidly. "We need to be ready. If the currents bring us close enough, we might reach shore with a craft." For the first time since he'd found her, Nanook smiled, a transformation that momentarily stunned him. In that smile, Amaruk saw not just hope, but certainty. Though she had no voice, her spirit spoke clearly. "We will survive this. We will return." The Umiak took shape under Amaruk's skilled hands, a small boat crafted from driftwood they'd collected, covered with sealskins from their hunting. Nanook worked alongside him, learning to stretch and sew the skins using bone needles, making them watertight with seal fat. "The moon rises tonight," Amaruk said, securing the last skin panel. "The tide will turn before midnight. We must be ready." Nanook nodded, her movements confident now. The fever had changed her. Where before she had seemed fragile, now determination radiated from her every gesture. She had survived the spirit world's calling. The physical world held less power to frighten her. As dusk approached, they loaded their few possessions into the Umiak. The ice beneath them groaned. Their flow was shrinking, melting at the edges as it drifted into warmer waters. In the distance, they could just make out the dark line of the mainland coast. "We'll have one chance," Amaruk explained, studying the water currents. "When the tide turns, we launch." The full moon rose, impossibly large on the horizon, casting silver light across the broken ice field. As predicted, their flow began to shift, drawn by invisible forces toward the distant shore. Amaruk watched the stars, calculating. "Now," he finally said. They pushed the Umiak into the black water, climbing in with practiced movements they'd rehearsed throughout the day. Amaruk took the paddle, guiding them through a maze of ice chunks, navigating channels that appeared and disappeared in moments. They were halfway to shore when the water around them erupted. A massive orca surfaced beside their tiny craft, its black dorsal fin gleaming in the moonlight. The Umiak rocked violently in its wake. "Stay still!" Amaruk commanded as a second orca appeared. The creatures circled them, curious or hunting. It didn't matter which. One bumped the boat from beneath, nearly capsizing them. Amaruk lost his grip on the paddle, watching helplessly as it disappeared into the dark waters. Without the paddle, they drifted at the mercy of current and creatures. The orcas continued circling, their massive bodies creating waves that threatened to swamp the small Umiak. Nanook clutched the sides, her knuckles white with tension. Amaruk made a decision. Removing his outer parka, he prepared to slip into the freezing water. "I'll distract them," he said quietly. "When they follow me, paddle with your hands toward shore." Nanook's eyes widened in horror. She grabbed his arm, shaking her head violently. "There is no other way," he insisted. "This is my atonement." Before he could move, Nanook did something unexpected. She began to sing, not with her voice, but with rhythmic tapping on the Umiak's wooden frame. The pattern was ancient, a calling song her grandmother had taught her for summoning seals. The vibrations traveled through water. The orcas paused their circling. Nanook continued her percussion, adding complexity to the rhythm. To Amaruk's astonishment, the great creatures began to move away, as if responding to her communication. When they reached the shore, Amaruk collapsed, exhaustion and exposure finally claiming their toll. Nanook, finding strength she didn't know she possessed, dragged him from the Umiak and built a hasty shelter from driftwood and sealskin. At dawn, she spotted smoke from her village in the distance. Using Amaruk's knife, she cut a branch and set its tip alight from their small fire. The villagers saw her signal and came running, first with suspicion at seeing the outcast, then with joy at finding Nanook alive. As they surrounded her with embraces, Nanook stood firmly beside the unconscious Amaruk. When the village elder suggested leaving him, something broke inside her. She opened her mouth and forced air through her damaged vocal cords. The sound was raw, barely human, but unmistakably a no. The silence of years had finally shattered like spring ice. As Nanook and Amaruk's story reminds us, sometimes our deepest wounds become our greatest strengths, and those we fear most may be the very ones destined to save us. What silent struggles are you facing that might actually be preparing you for an extraordinary journey ahead? If this tale of survival, healing, and finding your voice in the harshest conditions touched your heart, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that illuminate the resilience of the human spirit in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Your support helps us continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life.